We've broken into two chapter groups. One is our big picture chapter, led by Jayaram, and the second one is our more sort of showing it in practice chapter, and that's led by Helene. And Helene will also just talk about some recommendations and research questions that we developed from our groups yesterday afternoon.
We heard in the first session something about sheepdogging. I just realized sheepdogs can also train some sheep to do sheepdogging. So Margaret began as a sheepdog and she has now trained two sheep to do sheepdogging. As she mentioned, we divided ourselves into two groups, thinking that there is material for two chapters. One, the international flows in doctoral education, issues and perspectives. That is, rise the problem. And chapter 2 will look at possible solutions. I have undertaken the responsibility to coordinate the work on this chapter, which will have 8 sections. The first one is international mobility of intellectual capital, locating doctoral education flows. We will begin with the debate on brain drain and things like that, but confine ourselves to the flow of doctoral research scholars. Following that, we will discuss the continuous need and in a way inevitability of mobility of doctoral scholars. The third one, under what conditions such mobility takes place and what are the facilitators. We will look at 2 or 3 possible dimensions there. One, globalization, which increases the flows. A recession, which is likely to curtail the flow. Political instability in some parts. The second one, the educational infrastructure available in certain countries which seem to facilitate this process. And there we also raise the question of who validates knowledge. This is a very important question. If the doctorate comes out of say Harvard, perhaps everybody will accept it without any doubt. If the same doctorate were to come out of University of Karachi or some university in Sri Lanka, people will have 100 questions or 100 doubts. Another facilitator that we will discuss here is English language. Then there will be a short review of policies of sending countries. This will be followed by a review of policies of receiving countries. These are complementary. Then another issue that we raised is, just as this process is taking place internationally, in large educational systems, maybe in China, maybe in India, this process is happening internally. In other words, what we notice as unequal distribution of intellectual capital internationally, we also notice happening intranationally. So this chapter will look at, this section will look at intranational mobility of intellectual capital, what are the issues and what are the policies governing this. Following this, we will revisit the conceptual framework. There was a lot of discussion. I think our early career researchers commented on that. We focused more on intellectual inequality rather than process of intellectual equality, capital equality. We will revisit that debate, look at concepts like mobility, circulation, and networks from a critical lens. And finally, the chapter will conclude with a short note which will link what has been discussed in chapter 1 with what is going to be discussed in chapter 2. This section will be written jointly by me and the person who will be writing the introduction to chapter 2. Having said this, I may have given the impression, I think Jorge had a point of discussion with me on this. you will recall, I still believe that the discussion stems from the unequal distribution of intellectual capital. That issue is what is driving us. Whether it is going to disappear, etc., we do not know. The day on which I raised this issue, I made a reference to Matthew Principle. But notwithstanding my schooling in an Anglican mission school and college days at a Jesuit college, I could not recall the exact, wordings of the Matthew Principle. I thought I should do that, and it was facilitated by the New Testament copy kept in the room. So on Wednesday morning, very religiously after bath, I went through Matthew and look where actually this particular thing is. This is in chapter 13, para 13. It reads, "For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him." My worry is not the first part, that let some people have abundance, but let not people who do not have much, let not even that be taken away from them. Thank you very much.
Well, the second chapter, which how do I follow that? Is much more, I guess, prosaic, and what we want to do, and we're taking the same line as the second group, which is to document promising policies and practices in doctoral education for a global knowledge society. So this chapter will have an introduction, which is to learn from Sandra why we need such policies and practices, and of course it will be strongly linked with chapter 1, which will have explored the problem. We'll have a section on relevant research, and then we'll have a section of promising policies and practices, and at the moment we think we'll divide that up among the various stages of doctoral education. So I just thought I'd just quickly give you a little taste for the sort of brainstorming we had yesterday. So if we thought about practices for improving the candidature experience, we looked at practices for improving the lifestyle of a candidate, assisting with their candidature, and increasing cross-cultural awareness. Our policy recommendations. The first one is actually very brave, and I don't know whether the network feels that this is appropriate, but we wondered whether the network could undertake a project which was aimed at convincing international donors that there could be a scheme to assist sending countries develop the research infrastructure that would make their country more attractive to returning scholars. And the second one, which is at a much more local level, we thought that institutions in receiving countries needed to examine their internationalisation policies and practices through the lens of global inequality, as opposed to profit making, which is, I think, what is a driver for many institutions at the moment. And thirdly, we thought that there needed to be more sharing of expertise and capacity through networks as a new paradigm. And then lastly, areas for future research. We thought that there needed to be a cross-national analysis of the policies of sending and receiving countries with respect to the internationalisation of doctoral education. Secondly, we think we need to study the impact of internationalisation of doctoral education on domestic students. I mean, Marisi has spoken and written about this as such an opportunity for domestic students as well as international students, but we actually haven't found too much research looking into this. There's a bit at the undergraduate level, but not at the doctoral level. And we also think there needs to be a study of the conflict between national interest and individual benefit when it comes to doctoral education. So thank you.